Of business this morning is general questions. Question number 1, Kezia Dugdale.
To ask the Scottish Government whether the Edinburgh trams will be included in its concessionary fare scheme.
Minister Keith Brown.
This matter is under consideration and we will announce our decision shortly.
Kezia Dugdale.
It would be absurd if pensioners and disabled people could not use the trams for free. Instead of being able to travel on a free and regular bus, they would be forced onto an expensive tram, and that would be totally unacceptable. Not my words, Presiding Officer, but the words of Kenny McCaskill, printed in the Evening News, February 2007. But I couldn't agree more. Will the Minister back the Evening News campaign, ensure pensioners get a fair deal in Edinburgh, or must he insist on pushing grannies off the tram?
Keith Brown.
Of course, I'm more than happy to listen to Kezia Dugdale, and I certainly wouldn't want to disagree with her view about the trams being very expensive. But I'd also like to say that in listening to Kezia Dugdale, I'll also listen to, for example, Strathclyde Passenger Transport, who've written to me asking if there is concessionary travel in the trams, it should apply to the tube. I'll listen to Leslie Hines as well, who's asked for more money for both concessionary travel for buses and for trams. I'll listen to the other Labour MSPs around Scotland and their views on money being taken away from bus concessionary schemes towards tram schemes in Edinburgh. I'll listen also to Joanne Lamont, who said that these schemes have to be sustainable, that there's a something-for-nothing culture in Scotland. I will listen to all these points from the Labour Party. The difficulty I'll have is trying to make sense out of the contradictory, politically expedient and opportunistic nature of the representations that have been made.
Supplementary, Michael Biaggi.
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Presiding Officer, over the fanfare there. I have also a question from 2003, where the then Transport Minister in the Lib Lab executive, Nicola Stevens, states that local authorities have the power to establish local travel concession schemes for local transport facilities. Could the Minister confirm whether that's still the case and whether he would be willing to provide assistance to the City of Edinburgh Council should it wish to follow the example of others such as Angus who operate such schemes on top of the national entitlement system as well?
Minister.
It's a very good point that Marco Biaggi raises, and it is used not just in the instance that he's mentioned, but also, for example, by SPT, who I mentioned previously, where you can, and Edinburgh City Council can, of course, apply a subsidy and support in doing that. All I would say in terms of government additional support, we're looking very closely just now to see how we can maintain and improve the support we give for bus services, and overwhelmingly people in Scotland travel on buses. We can't magic more money. Any money for this additional trams or any other concession scheme will have to come from the pot of money that we use currently for buses. So we have to look very carefully at this and protect the interests of those who want to see the bus services which they have protected across the breadth of Scotland.
Question number 2, Nigel Dawn.
Officer to ask the Scottish Government how it plans to commemorate the centenary of the outbreak of the First World War.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
As I told Parliament in November, the Scottish Government is working with a range of organisations on proposals to commemorate the centenary of the First World War. Today, Presiding Officer, I can announce that I have appointed Norman Drummond to lead our commemorative programme. Mr Drummond has served as a chaplain in the Parachute Regiment in the Black Watch. He's currently chaplain to Her Majesty the Queen in Scotland. He founded Columba 1400, the highly regarded education leadership programme on the Isle of Skye, which maximises the potential of young people. He's previously been a BBC National Governor for Scotland. He brings with him considerable expertise and leadership ability, and he will chair the Scottish Commemorative Panel. I will announce details of the panel and further plans for our commemorations in due course. And as part of such commemorations, the First Minister announced on 14th of January an additional £1 million towards the upgrade and maintenance of war memorials in our communities.
Thank you, Minister. Can I ask for order in the Chamber, please? Nigel Dawn.
Thank you very much. I thank the Minister for her response. Can I draw her attention to the fact that it is this year the centenary of the Montrose airfield, which played such an enormous part in training RAF pilots through the First War and indeed the Second. Does the Government have any plans to ensure that there are place allocations for that there's help available for places such as Montrose Airfield to commemorate their importance and their significance in the First War and beyond?
Cabinet Secretary.
The impact of the First World War was felt extensively across Scotland, and clearly in every village, town, community there will be commemorations over the period 2014 to 2018. I am aware of the centenary exhibition at Montrose Air Station Heritage Centre. Unfortunately, I could not accept the offer to come to the opening, but I do intend to try and visit the exhibition during the course of this year. But I think it is very important that Mr Drummond and the panel, in assessing the range and depth of the commemorative activity, reflect on the range and depth of that experience across Scotland. And I'm sure everybody will want to be aware of what is happening in their local village, towns and across Scotland, in making sure we have a fitting tribute and commemoration to a very important part of the experience of Scotland during the First World War.
Question number 3, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last communicated with NHS Borders and what issues were covered.
Cabinet Secretary Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, Scottish Government ministers and officials communicate with all health boards, including NHS Borders, on a regular basis. I met with NHS board chairs, including the chair of NHS Borders, on the 14th of January. We discussed Scottish Government priorities for the National Health Service in Scotland and matters concerning the health of the population.
Christine Graham.
Other than meetings, what discussions has the Cabinet Secretary had regarding the delivery of paediatric services in the BGH in the Borders? Because it would be very detrimental to my constituents if they had to travel to Edinburgh for children's services.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has been in regular contact with all boards in the South East region regarding the delivery of their paediatric services, which of course includes the Borders area. All of these boards have assured us that they are fully committed to maintaining 24/7 paediatric services. We have made clear to NHS Lothian and NHS Fife and NHS Borders that we expect them to engage fully with the public and other stakeholders to ensure children and babies get the best services available in the South East of Scotland region. No final decisions have been made by the boards about the future configuration of paediatric services. We will support every effort to ensure that the best quality paediatric services are maintained.
Briefly, please, Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Could I ask the Cabinet Secretary, further to the question and by Christine Graham and also to his answer, if he could highlight the, what interim arrangements there will be, as I understand that in NHS Borders and other parts of the South East and Tayside, that it has required the boards to bring forward plans to move to a non-training grade workforce by August.
I'm afraid I must hurry you.
Can he give assurances to provide? Can he provide assurances that families in the Borders will have sufficient out-of-hours paediatric and neonatal care in the meantime?
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely, Presiding Officer. As I said in my answer to Christine Graham, 24/7 cover is absolutely essential at all times, and the Government and the boards are determined to make sure that that continues.
Question number 4, Fiona MacLeod.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what transport options are available for care home patients who are discharged from accident and emergency departments at night, and what guidance is given to NHS boards regarding this.
Cabinet Secretary Alex Neil.
Presiding Officer, there is no specific guidance or protocol for residents of care homes who are assessed as ready for discharge from accident and emergency departments at night. Each case is treated according to the circumstances, such as the availability of family and carer support, as well as specialist patient transport. No vulnerable patient should be discharged without adequate arrangements for onward transport being in place.
Fiona MacLeod.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I wonder, would it be worth looking at developing guidelines for this and distributing them to care homes?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I agree it would be helpful to develop guidelines with and for all interested parties to ensure that vulnerable patients who are discharged from accident and emergency late at night are given safe passage to their place of residence, be that a care home or a private dwelling, and we'll be taking that agenda forward.
Thank you. Question number 5, John Lamont.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met representatives of the Scottish Court Service.
Cabinet Secretary Ken McCaskill.
I met the then interim Chief Executive of the Scottish Court Service, Eric McQueen, on 14 November 2012. We discussed a number of current civil and criminal justice policy issues. I'm due to meet with the Lord President, who's chair of the SCS board, this Friday. The Chief Executive of the Scottish Court Service will also be present. Officials from the Scottish Government are, of course, in regular contact with officials of the Scottish Court Service on a range of issues.
John Lamont.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. He will be aware that the Scottish Court Service has proposed the closure of Duns Sheriff and JP courts in my constituency, as well as the closure of neighbouring Peebles and Haddington Sheriff courts. If the closure of Duns Court goes ahead, victims and witnesses will have to travel 30 miles to Jedburgh, a journey that takes almost 2 hours by public transport. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my concern that these proposals will place a great strain on existing stretch court services that will seriously harm access to justice and cause further delay to cases?
Kenny McCaskill.
Well, I'm aware of the member's concerns. He has been in contact and doubtless he has contributed that to the consultation carried out by SCS that has since closed. Clearly that will be a factor that the Lord President and the Chief Executive will consider. Matters have been looked at in terms of public transport arrangements and the number of people involved, but clearly that's a factor that the Scottish Court Service will have to weigh up before they are required to make the final decision.
Brief supplementary, Neil Findlay.
When he met the Scottish Court Service, did they raise with him cuts to the Procurator Fiscal Service, the closure of courts and the resultant lack of court time? And if they did, what was his response?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the responsibility for the Procurator Fiscal Service lies with the Lord Advocate in the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service. It's entirely separate either from my own jurisdiction or indeed that of the Lord President. So I don't think it would be appropriate to have raised that matter with him.
Question number 6, Stuart Stevenson.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the recent Scottish Household Survey suggesting that up to 30% of adults volunteer.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Household Survey captures the percentage of adults in Scotland who volunteer in a formal way. We know that many people also volunteer in an informal way through helping friends or neighbours. So in reality, the percentage of people volunteering will be higher than the survey suggests.
Stuart Stevenson.
I'm delighted to hear that the figure may be even higher. In the last year, we've had very successful volunteering around the Olympic Games. The 2014 Commonwealth Games is soon to start recruiting its team of volunteers. What lessons can Scotland learn from the volunteering practices of the Olympic Games, and how can this serve to encourage others to involve themselves in volunteering at a community level in general?
Cabinet Secretary.
On the specific point around lessons learnt from the London 2012 experience, the 2014 Organising Committee have worked closely with the London Organising Committee of the Olympic Games to learn lessons from the London experience, and that has flowed through into the opening of the volunteer recruitment programme for the Glasgow Games in 2014, which has got off to a really good start in terms of the interest and involvement of members of the public. We clearly would encourage more individuals to volunteer for the Commonwealth Games. It will be a tremendously exciting and dynamic opportunity for volunteering, as I think we all saw in relation to the London Games. And of course, in general, the Government values enormously the contribution that is made by volunteers to the provision of services and support to individuals within our society, and to recognise the significant contribution that individuals make in this respect.
A supplementary from Fiona MacLeod.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I, along with some other MSPs, Cabinet Secretary, have volunteered to be a volunteer at the Commonwealth Games, but I wonder if you would like to join me in encouraging employers to help folk to attend their training and be volunteers at this wonderful opportunity in 2014.
Cabinet Secretary.
I certainly would echo those sentiments, and I can confirm that the Scottish Government has amended the staff special leave policy to allow staff to take up to 5 days special leave to volunteer at the Games. And although it is not within my providence, I understand the Parliamentary Corporate Body has taken a similar decision. I think this is such a unique opportunity for Glasgow and for the people of Scotland that a positive response from employers would be very welcome. And from my experience of encountering volunteers that were participating in the London Games, it clearly was for them a landmark occasion in their own lives, and I would encourage employers to make that possible and practical for members of their staff in Scotland.
Question number 7, Mark MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government what impact the proposed so-called bedroom tax reductions to housing benefit will have on Scotland's housing associations and local authorities.
Cabinet Secretary Nicola Sturgeon.
The introduction of under-occupancy deductions or the bedroom tax will reduce housing benefit income for social landlords by an estimated £60 to £65 million annually. I am also and obviously very concerned about the impact on Scotland's most vulnerable children and families. An estimated 105,000 households in the social sector will lose an average of £600 a year. The Scottish Government has been consistent and very clear in our opposition to this UK Government reform.
Mark MacDonald.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for an answer. With reference to the impact on families, a report went to last week's Housing and Environment Committee on Aberdeen City Council looking at the impact on kinship carers. Regarding under-occupancy, the report stated rules for kinship carers are not so straightforward. Kinship carers of a not looked-after child will not be affected, but for those of a looked-after child, it will depend on whether or not the child counts as part of the family. The legislation is complex, and in the absence of a test case or clarification from the UK Government, interpretations vary. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that we need urgent clarification from the UK Government, given the huge impact this could have, not just on kinship carers, but on the ability to recruit kinship carers in the future?
Cabinet Secretary.
I very much welcome the report that Mark MacDonald has cited. It certainly shows the damaging nature of these sweeping reforms by the DWP and the fact that they simply don't take account of the impact of them on our most vulnerable families. We in the Scottish Government are taking action to mitigate this effect as far as we can. We are in discussions with the DWP about the way discretionary housing payments will operate in Scotland to ensure that kinship carers can be prioritised for any support in addition to foster carers. The Minister for Children and Young People also announced to Parliament in September a review of the financial support provided to kinship carers, and this will report this year.
Thank you. Question number 8 has been withdrawn for understandable reasons. Question number 9, Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had about widening access to culture for people in North Glasgow.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The Scottish Government is committed to widening opportunities for everyone to access, engage in and benefit from cultural activity. The Village Storytelling Centre in Glasgow, for example, received funding as part of the Year of Creative Scotland so they could work with young carers in the wider Glasgow and West of Scotland area, including Maryhill, through their Creative Sparks project. The Glasgow 2014 Organising Committee with Creative Scotland and Glasgow Life have recently announced £4 million open fund for the 2014 Glasgow Cultural Programme, and the Minister for External Affairs and International Development has been involved in discussions to ensure it will offer new opportunities for audiences across Scotland to see, experience and participate in our vibrant culture.
Patricia Ferguson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I too am delighted to hear of the progress being made, particularly in connection with 2014. However, she may be aware that there is a mood within North Glasgow that suggests that El Sistema would be very welcome in the area, and there have been some preliminary talks and discussions with the organisation as to how that might be facilitated. I wonder if she could advise if this is something that the Scottish Government would support, and if so, in what way?
Cabinet Secretary.
I was delighted that the Scottish Government was able to support the expansion of El Sistema into Glasgow, into Govanhill in particular, and I'm sure all members will congratulate El Sistema on that. The funding we provided was not just for Govanhill, it was actually about how El Sistema could expand the big noise orchestras progressively across future years. And in terms of the legacy that we have, there are lots of different ways. Music is most undoubtedly one of them, that we can really enrich the lives of many of our young people, and this government is very committed to that, and I will continue my very positive discussions with Richard Holloway and the excellent team at El Sistema, and will continue to do so in future years. But I'm sure all of the Chamber would be very pleased to congratulate El Sistema in the work they've done to expand in Glasgow and to expand particularly in Govanhill in Glasgow.
I'm going to take question 10, but I need very brief question and answer. Question 10, Jenny Mara.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the figures recently released by Barnardo's concerning the rest of the UK, whether it will carry out research into the scope of child trafficking in Scotland.
Kenny McCaskill.
The figures released by Barnardo's relate to children within their services who had indicated that they had been trafficked for the purposes of sexual exploitation. The National Referral Mechanism collates UK data on suspected and confirmed cases of trafficking. The gathering of accurate, reliable data on this clandestine activity is complex and difficult. For this reason, we've recently commissioned the University of Bedfordshire to research the scale and nature of child sexual exploitation in Scotland and how child trafficking relates to this.
Very briefly, Jenny Mara.
Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that a review of the legislation in Scotland is required, as the crime of human trafficking is not clearly provided for in Scots law, with current provisions straddling 2 acts, and that if detection is going to increase, then police need a clearly defined crime to work to?
Question. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we've indicated the restriction on government time, but a willingness to bring in an aggravation for trafficking that's been promoted by the Lord Advocate that will give law enforcement more powers to ensure that those who are involved in this evil trade are brought to account and brought to justice.
Thank you very much. Before we come to First Minister's questions, I'm sure members will wish to join me in welcoming to the gallery the Speaker of the Northern Ireland Assembly, William Hay, MLA. The next item of business is questions to the First Minister. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding